Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. This is a game that people have been anticipating for a long, long time. And the newer people who are just getting into it, they may not realize just how much Square Enix teased us with this game for a long, 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 long time. And, well, I'm going to dig into some of my impressions about it. I'm going to dig into, some of my thoughts about it after having played the original and finding that it was beloved back in 1997, 1998. I was just a young man and just starting with my art career and hadn't been working in games or anything like that. But this was one of the games series that made me want to work in video games. I was dreaming about it, I would fire up my PlayStation 1 and I just could not stop like playing games and drawing all day long. I was making comics at the time. But I got addicted to the story, and it was what made the game really exciting at the time. The original was that the characters had a very real kind of a way of interacting with each other. And the characters themselves were so iconic and identifiable even for that time, even with the kind of really low poly graphics. And so I don't really need to go too much into why this game is beloved, the characters, the world, the concepts, because if you're watching this, you probably already know. And I'm going to save you some time. If you're not into the new one, you might disagree with some of my opinions because I'm totally stoked about it. I just played through 100% of it. Now, when I say 100%, I mean I finished the story. I did not go back and do all of the, get all the trophies or play it on impossible difficulties or any of that. And I'm not that kind of a gamer. I don't have that kind of time except with Metal Gear. That's the only series that I do that with for the most part. And GTA maybe. But digging into Rebirth, obviously you guys already know that it's the second part of the remake of the original PlayStation game, the original PlayStation 1 game. And I will be as spoiler-free as possible. I'm not going to spoil anything. I'm mostly just going to be singing its praises from a game designer standpoint. And this is one of the things that I think really is stand out about this game is that Final Fantasy 15 came along and it reintroduced open world gameplay to the Final Fantasy series since 12. 12 was probably the closest thing to the last closest thing to Final Fantasy that we knew of, which was sort of like these large open areas and then where you have a lot of choice. It's like side missions and other things going on in this sort of confined area. But there was a main quest line, and then by the end of the game, you're kind of free to go anywhere. And I consider that open world for an RPG because you do need the linearity of knowing where to go next to progress the story. And that's one of the things that this particular game does insanely well, really satisfying. The director and the people at Square Enix were saying for a while they didn't really know how. They didn't know how to do an open world RPG anymore. They had gone very linear with their storytelling, and I don't want to, this isn't about all the other Final Fantasies from 10 till 15 or 16 or any of that. But I mean, I played 16 just, maybe a few months before playing 7 Rebirth, and I gotta say, I 10 times over prefer Rebirth, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, because it gives you so much more player choice. You're playing as more than one character. You can kind of control anybody in your party. And if you're playing as Aerith, you're insane because she's so gimped and not useful. Perhaps I just never learned the proper way to utilize all of her systems, but I did not particularly enjoy playing as her. Yuffie was also difficult, and I'm also not a big Cait Sith fan, although there are moments where Cait Sith is insanely fun to control. Probably the most fun to control is Cloud, and I think that that's a very good choice because he's kind of the default. Yes, you can play through the whole game just as Cloud, but whenever you're into a battle, you can kind of swap between any of the characters. And this is just such a brilliant system. Like every Final Fantasy for the next 10 games should use this system. It is absolutely freaking baller. There's an ATB gauge, which you can see filling up, and the bottom right corner under each character. And when that ATB gauge is full, you can press a commands menu button, which would then allow you to access a plethora of abilities specific to that character. And as you're changing out your weapons, you're learning new abilities. So maybe, for instance, you get like a focused strike attack, which is like really helps to stagger enemies, very early on. And then you can carry that over into new weapons that you might equip as you progress. And each weapon kind of has a different perk to it, and not only just like a special command, but a perk to it. And that's true for almost every character and every weapon. I have no idea how they would possibly manage to organize all of these different functions and features to play well together. This is an insanely complex culmination of, I would say, many, 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 many iterations of Final Fantasy, and not just Final Fantasy, of RPGs in general. And I was so pleased, so pleased that they made the characters a ton less goofball. There is some goofball, lighthearted moments, and the game definitely feels a lot more playful than, like, say, Final Fantasy 16, which is just dreary, And this isn't about comparing the two, but there were times with this company where it seemed as though it was going extremely Japanese. And if I were to point at 15, for example, as a good example of that, where it's like there's a little bit of a cultural divide there. And there are a lot of Americans who are like, I don't get it, man, this whole boy band thing. It looked like a J-pop band, basically running around in their leathers, and I actually liked 15 a lot, and particularly the structure of that game, which is something that I feel like they really pulled from when they were making this. And this is exactly what I was hoping for, is a lot more of that kind of open world hub areas, giving me lots of choice, lots of like, well, I want to go and just see what's over in that cave over there. Or maybe if I explore, I might find something over here or over there. And some people are going to go, oh, well, no, it's like an Ubisoft thing. You got to go to these towers, and then that unlocks like, more local things to do. But I actually found that it was just sort of like a perfect blend of like optional content. It's not required. You don't have to go and do all that side stuff. I would say that I did run into a glitch whereby I had done all the side stuff in an area, and then it just totally forgot that. Like I had to redo it because my save got corrupted a little bit. And then I had to redo that one particular region of all the side events and all the side quests. And I'm guessing that had something to do with this feature that it's not really a spoiler, but if you're wondering in the post game, if you want to go back and redo a chapter, you can redo that chapter, and it kind of undoes your progress so that you can redo it. And without having to redouble check the same quest over and over again. You can kind of go back and replay the game on different difficulties and things like that. But that's all I'm going to say about the end game. Other than just that, like, it's very moving. It's a very powerful story. I don't want to give any spoilers because we know what happens in the original, and I don't want to even say what happens in this one. Let's just say that it's very emotional, very, very powerful, especially if you've been really investing in the characters' stories and you've gotten into their relationships. And there is like a kind of a dating opportunity between Tifa and Aerith, and I ended up having no real, very modern of me, no real particular affinity towards either of them. Don't get me wrong, personally, I think Tifa's baller. Whatever the case, Aerith is sweet, but she has a kind of a charm. And so what they do with the characters is just so incredibly powerful, because what you end up doing is feeling a connection, and you start to feel like sad for things that happen in their past. You feel the weight of these events that are going on in the story, and the impact that they had on these characters, and even characters that aren't in your party. It feels like you're going through towns and you're meeting people, and it feels like there are so many people that would join your party if it were that kind of game, but that would spread things too thin. But everybody's got this kind of like, they're impacted by things that are happening in the world. And that just gives so much life to, like, this game is freaking legendary. There are not many games that I will buy and keep the physical copy of. This is one of those games that's absolutely going in my collection. And 20 years from now, I will come back and replay all three of these. Hopefully the third one doesn't suck. I don't know how they could screw it up. This team is so incredibly talented and skilled. And obviously they love the original source material with a kind of a passion that, I mean, there must have been like incredible debates going on within the team. I don't know how they were able to magically get the original Square formula down so well. Like they show a reverence for the original material while simultaneously layering it and adding so much more to it, in the same way that the characters have so much more detail visually. They have so much more detail in their story as well. And yes, it doesn't take away from the original, because, just as an example, I played through a short, very, very, very short segment of the original, whereby the player finds a chocobo and then has to go through a swamp. And in the original, there's a silhouette of a big serpent in the swamp, and you don't even have to fight it. It's optional. And then you end up in this cave, and you go through the cave, you come out the other side after fighting the Turks. All that's done in the original PS1 game in about 10 minutes or less. In this game, that's about 2 hours worth of content. And along the way, you've got situations that are sort of insisting upon happening that were kind of optional in the original. It makes the original feel like a simplified, almost board game version of this. Like, this was always the intention, is what I got from feeling, or the feeling I got from playing through this. And ultimately, the over-the-top sword play, again, I'm going to bring up 16, but in 16, I just felt like lights were flashing at me, constantly flashing at me during combat. And I almost didn't care what was going on. A lot of it was automated, because I found some rings that just sort of automated a lot of the combat. And then with this one, it felt so much more dire. I could not let go of the controls because my characters would die. And so it required, even though there's a lot of automation that can happen, and even auto combat and auto leveling, I never felt like it was making the game so easy that I was checking out. In fact, I was very invested in every single battle. I never felt like, oh God, what a slog that I've got another battle. And that is one thing that the original had. While the player was walking around, he'd be the only sprite or character on screen, and then you'd just the screen would flash and you'd end up in a battle. And there was a kind of an anxiety that comes from that. And I'm so glad that we're beyond that. I haven't played a game with sort of random encounters like that, random battles, in a long time. Even in the Twilight Monk game, it's like I wanted some kind of a sprite that you have to, you can dodge, you can avoid in that world map before you get into an encounter. I think it's so essential for an RPG, because the last thing you want is the player to just feel annoyed that, oh my God, I gotta kill 10 more of these little helicopter plant things, it's just too many. And in fact, that's something else that I'll say. I've been somewhat critical of Tetsuya Nomura's designs, his design sense, because it's so old school, and sometimes it's as if there's not much story attached to it. And there you go. That's going to upset some people because they think I'm saying it sucks. No, I'm not. I'm saying that those designs were grounded so much better in this iteration. And perhaps, maybe, he was just ahead of his time. And they weren't able to capture that in the original older PS1 days. But, and here's the other thing I want to point out, Tetsuya Nomura, he's not in there redesigning all these characters. There's a whole team of artists and concept artists, a whole team of people that you'll never know their name probably. And there's so many incredible, talented people that are adding to the original source material with great care. And they deserve some acknowledgement here for taking what was essentially very simplified sketches and turning them into something like this. I will say this also. I believe that iconic character designs, it's so much easier to make your characters super iconic if you're pulling from classic material like this. So, and what I mean by that, as a character designer that's worked on a few video games in my day, I would say that sometimes in modern times we get obsessed with the details and the intricacies of things. But those classic games, they had much lower resolution and lower poly counts. So you had to be very iconic and simple with your designs. And when you're looking at the lineup of characters, you had to make sure that they were all super distinct and had very identifiable, iconic elements to them. And so when we remake these classic games, and I think the same is true when we look at Metroid Prime, and when we look at Super Mario, when we look at games that have been completely remade, it's generally those characters they're iconic, and part of that is because they came from very simplified design sense. The classic retro style required that everything was simple in its design, but now we're at a point where if I and here's this is purely my opinion as a character designer for games, but like Final Fantasy 16, I don't find the character design to be iconic at all. And I think part of that is because of, and that is any character in that game. I thought the Moogles were the best thing in Final Fantasy 16. And don't get me wrong, it's a beautiful game. There was beautiful monster designs and things like that, beautiful graphics. But the character design lineup for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is freaking like spectacular. It is bar none some of the best. And I will put it to you now. I will prophesize that we will see some kind of, and people are going to be upset about this, but we will see some kind of a sequel to this. These characters will live on, whether it is in a spin-off. I think that we'll probably get like a spin-off with Tifa, or we'll get a spin-off with Vincent, another spin-off. We're going to keep seeing Final Fantasy VII stuff because these characters, it's like Mickey Mouse. Like Square Enix has some of the most iconic characters in history right here, and we have not seen the last of them, even though many people, this is much to the chagrin of many, many people, because some people just want a good thing to end. It's like, let it go, Metal Gear Solid. Will we ever have a Solid Snake written as well as what we have already? I don't know. To some degree, it's like Cowboy Bebop. It ended, and partly it's legendary because it didn't drag on long enough, like Harvey Dent said, to become the villain, And but I do think that Square Enix has something here that they're going to want to squeeze forever. And I also think that they have that with Final Fantasy VI, but they haven't utilized it. They haven't pulled that card yet. And I think there are rumors of a Final Fantasy IX remake that's going to get this kind of a treatment. And I would be stoked. I would be on board for that. I'd love to see it, especially if they give it this much care. But getting back to Final Fantasy VII and what makes it really good, there's some vehicle stuff in there. I don't want to spoil it too much other than to just say that it's really rewarding. And there were moments where I was like, I would say like more than any game I've played in the last 5 years, I put everything else down. It was hands down, this was my jam for like 6 weeks. It's all I played. It's all I wanted to play. And the more I played it, the more I loved it. And when I was finally done, I was so moved that I just couldn't do anything else for like a day. like I couldn't get back to reading One Piece. You guys know how much I love One Piece right now. I couldn't get back to watching any other stuff. I started picking up Fallout 4, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that again in maybe a future video. But anyway, I certainly love Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth. I love that this one specifically, like after playing Remake, which is the first part of this, I kept thinking I wanted more exploration. I wanted to be able to just go to any part of Midgar that I wanted to go. And I was really curious, like, are they going to let you go back to that in this one? And I won't spoil anything. But I won't say anything about that other than to just say that, like, it does a damn good job of giving you this, like, freedom, but simultaneously keeping you reminded of, like, what is it you're working towards? Where are you going? There are some really annoying things in this game. I'm not a big fan of Queen's Blood. Like, boom, there, I said it. And yet, this is a game that forces you to play this card game. Like, you really can't avoid it. You have to get good at this card game in order to progress the story. And that really annoyed me. Like, I really wish there was a way to just kind of go, let's just give, like, if you opt for it, like, you could skip that or get, like, some power card that just lets you win every time. Because I wasn't into it at all. And it's sort of like, you're shoved into a corner where, like, you cannot progress until you've played this card game. And literally, when you don't have a lot of free time, then being forced to play a card game that you're not into in order to progress the part of the game that you are into is frustrating and annoying. And so, like, you know, that actually got me looking at my own game design sense with Twilight Monk and going, like, you know, is there any side stuff that I'm forcing the player to do here? And I want to avoid that in my games as well. And also, I would say that, like, there were some aspects of the game world where it felt like I wanted to go back and revisit but I was kind of forced to move forward. And again, I'm trying to be very, very vague here without giving any spoilers. But yeah, there were things like that. But the characters' interactions themselves, the dialogue between the characters, extremely well written. I didn't find anything that was particularly cringy or even Kate Sith, which I had no idea how in the heck are they going to do Kate Sith. But they did it really well. He's got like this accent, and it just adds so much to his personality and his character. And I found that he was actually at times like fun to play as, especially if you call on his Moogle that he has. So yeah, I think it also inspired me to want to play the original, but it's a rough one. The original is kind of rough to play these days, unless if you're used to that PS1 style. There's a lot of like marching in the band, or not the band, you have to do this mini game in Junon where you have to march with the other soldiers. And it's like, I could not figure it out. I kind of faked it just to get through it. And there wasn't a lot of instructions back then. In the early days of PS1, it's like almost 95% of video games had terrible controls. That's like the best thing about modern gaming, is like the tight controls on everything that we have now. And the controls in this game, I think this system with the ATB, the movement, the attacks, it's absolutely baller. It's absolutely incredible. I had so much fun with this game. I'd love to know your thoughts on it. I have a lot of hopes and dreams for the third part, and I'm especially hoping it gives you a lot more of that freedom to like go back. And spoiler free, but at the same time, there was some mobility that you have in the third part, the rest of this game in the original, that I don't know how in the heck they're going to do. And those of you who know what I'm talking about, but like really wide open, kind of exploration. And I'm hoping for a lot of that. And they're probably pulling their hair out over there at Square Enix right now. But I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this one, on this series, on these remakes. I personally just can't get enough of it. I'm super stoked for the next one, and I think it's probably going to be 3 or 4 years before we get it. But I'm in for the whole ride. It'll be PS6, maybe Switch 2. I don't know. I'm looking forward to like a big box set of all 3 of them. I'll play through the whole darn thing sometime, some summer, you know what I mean? Or some winter, once I retire, of course, after playing everything else. Anyway, thank you guys so much for tuning in to just hear my big fat opinion about this, about video games. I like this part of being on YouTube. It's one of my favorite parts. I love talking games. So if you're playing something, let me know in the comments. I don't know. I got a little bit of after you watch a really great show, they call it a show hole, where it's like, I don't know what the heck else to play right now. This was so good. There's anything else seems like kind of boring in contrast. Dipping my toe in Fallout 4, I might come into that with a future video. So anyway, that's it for me on this one. Thank you for tuning in. All right, ciao.